Hi, I'm Trixie Simons from Sew Softy, and this is interview number 3 in my series on teachers teaching kids how to sew. Now, this interview is with Amy Lindahl, a teacher from California. Now, Amy had never sewn with her kids before, and she decided to get them to design and sew their own emoji cushions. Now, let's see how that went. Hi, this morning, actually not this morning, today I'm interviewing or at least chatting with Amy, who lives in California, and she's recently sewn with her students. So I'm looking forward to seeing what she did and how it went. Hi, Amy. Thanks for chatting.
Hello, glad to be here.
Amy, would you like to introduce yourself?
My name is Amy Lindahl, and I am a third grade classroom teacher in Hayward, California. So I teach in the public schools in California. And this is my 4th year teaching. Prior to being a teacher, I worked in technology and software in Silicon Valley.
Oh, wow. That's a bit of a change.
Yes.
So you recently did a sewing project, a sewing unit with your students or with some of your students, is that right?
I did. So we did a fiber arts unit, and the big project we did was sewing emojis.
Oh,
And
wow.
the samples that I have here, I don't have the kids because they want to take them home immediately, but
Yes, absolutely.
I showed them, and they got to pick their own emoji and design it and sew it.
Okay, what year did you do your project with? Which year class did you do your sewing with?
3rd grade.
Oh, sorry, you did say 3rd grade. Okay, and how many kids were in that class?
There's about 25 students in the 3rd grade class.
Okay, have you ever sewn with your students before? Is this the first time or?
I have not sewn with my students
Oh,
before, and I am a bit of an amateur sewer, although I took a fiber arts class in the summertime because I'm working on my master's in arts and education. So I took a fiber arts studio class in the summer, and we did things like weaving and sewing a stuffy or softy. And I really enjoyed it. And a lot of the teachers or articles that I read talked about how much kids love to do this. So I decided my goal for this year was to get them sewing.
and you did it.
And I
So
did.
what sort of preparation did you do before the class to get the kids ready to sew, if any?
Yes. So we did a little bit of a scaffolded curriculum. So we started with fiber arts concepts and weaving. So we talked about weaving with paper. We did some weaving with paper so they could understand kind of the up and down motion of what they'd be doing.
Yep.
And then they did a weaving with cardboard and yarn. So that also gave them experience with textiles. And then we moved into using some lacing cards just with regular yarn and talked about the whip stitch and the running stitch. So they did the lacing card, and then they moved on to a stitch sampler, also known as a sewing quiz. And I had recorded a video for them with instructions, and they watched that on their Chromebooks. And then I could tell how they were doing by walking around the classroom and seeing where they were. I like to record videos. It's a technique I've learned in my program called flipping the classroom. And students are able to do things on their own time. So if they need to stop and pause and rewind,
Wow.
they can do that.
So
So
they each have their own little Chromebook, computer
yes,
or screen or
yes.
whatever. Oh, wow. Sorry, go on.
So they did the stitch sampler, AKA sewing quiz. And when they were done with that, they got to design. I showed them some pictures of emojis, and I gave them a Post-it note. And I said, design the emoji you want to sew. And they, put the different eyes and mouths and nose on there. And then I took all of those and stuck them on the wall and counted up how many of each, like how many sunglasses do we have and how many heart eyes. And I think a lot of them put $ eyes, which I didn't have the talent to cut.
Oh,
And
no.
I actually cut the round shapes myself because I didn't have enough classroom scissors that were for fabric.
Yeah, it's hard.
So I did pre-cut that, and it was easy because I was using the same template and just cutting a circle. And then they were able to choose the colors of felt that they wanted, and then lay it out and put the pins in it, and then start sewing it up.
Okay, so let's go back. What the stitch sampler or the quiz? So was that like they just had some felt and they actually had to do different stitches? What was the sampler
Yes.
exactly?
So they had a small piece of felt, like just a little tiny one about this big,
Yep.
and they did a running stitch and a whip stitch. So it's the same thing that they practiced on the card, the lacing card.
And
so
this was just with a real needle, with a needle and
the
thread.
real needle, they put their name in Sharpie on the stitch sampler, and then I could tell where they were, and I could give them feedback on, what they needed to improve about their stitches. But I also learned from your book that every stitch is a good stitch, so I can't be too critical.
It sounds perfect.
And then I could tell by looking on their desk, and that little stitch sampler became the place where they would store their pin or their needle. Sorry, they would store their needle on that and keep it in there. And then they had a Ziploc bag they would put all their supplies into.
The supplies they put, and what supplies did you use? What needles did you choose to use? Thread?
So I used this. It's called a sewing needle on Amazon. They called it a sewing or embroidery needle. So it's a little bit longer. Yep. You can see.
Yeah.
I've probably bought 1 million needles in the last couple months. And when I took my fiber arts class, another art teacher said, get these ones, they're really good.
Okay.
And the pitfalls I've had with needles before is some people said, get needles for furniture. And those were blunt needles, and those don't work well on felt at all. It just makes the kids aggravated and is very difficult to sew. So you want something that's sharp. And once they understand that, how they're holding the needle, they're always holding it by the end. They're not poking themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you tried the chenille needles, which are very similar?
I have. The ones that I've seen before in the store are a little bit smaller, I guess a little bit pointier. And these ones were just I think these are probably more like embroidery needles. They're a nice length and size.
What thread did you use with the kids?
There is a store in the US called Daiso, which is
Daiso.
You have Daiso too. Okay. Yes. I love Daiso. So I got the lace yarn, also known as crochet yarn. Or embroidery thread. I mean, I don't know the history there, but it doesn't unravel like traditional embroidery thread. So originally I had bought a bunch of these and put them in little kits for the tables, but I ended up keeping some of the supplies on a back table and letting them cut the length of yarn that they needed for that project.
Okay, so they just would have had the yarn. They didn't double over the yarn. They just had it like single. Okay, that's great. The felt and stuffings you use, that was also just from Amazon, were they? Or
the felt, I also got the felt from Daiso because they have these big sheets. They have sheets that are about the size of a yard, maybe a little bit less, and they have a nice thickness. They're not too thin. I've, bought some stuff on Amazon that was really, either it was too thin when I get like a bunch at the craft store, or it's too kind of stiff. It's like
it's very coarse sometimes, and it's hard for the kids to put the needle through.
The Daiso stuff was nice because I could get a couple of the sheets for a decent price. And then I just made a template for the circle and just, made like 20 circles from each sheet.
Well, that's amazing. The variety of felts from really really easy, soft to use, or too soft. Or then you go the other extreme. You buy felts that are so hard and tough and scratchy that the kids can't push their needles through it. And you just don't know what you're buying unless you can actually feel the felt when you buy it. So Felt's a bit of a tricky one sometimes when you buy online. So I've never looked at Daiso, but it's on my list now to have a look at
So
Daiso.
good. It's so good for craft supplies.
Yeah. Anything else that you did to prepare the classroom or the kids for sewing? Did you have little stations, or everything was on the kids' table?
Originally when I took my fiber arts class, I had put together little kits where you'd have some needles and some pins and stuff on their table where everything would be at the table. But I decided just to have them use the Ziploc bags to keep their supplies in, because I didn't have enough scissors to go around for everybody.
Yeah.
I basically kept the stuff they needed. If they needed to cut anything or trim anything, they could trim the thread at their table because they had paper scissors. That was fine. And if they needed more thread, they would just come to the back table where I was. And that gave me a chance to help them. If they were having difficulty in their project, I would help them. And then sometimes they were sitting on the floor a couple times, and I kind of sit with them in the beginning of the project and help people that needed some help getting going.
What sort of difficulties did you find that the kids had?
So a lot of the kids don't know how to tie a knot.
Yeah,
So that's specifically one of the things I asked them to do when they did the stitch sampler. And most of them did it with the stitch sampler, but where they got confused is when they needed to tie two pieces together, when they were closing something up. That caused some confusion. The other thing that was a little, I didn't anticipating being a challenge was some of them, I'd look at their project and they hadn't pulled the needle all the way through. So they had these gaping pieces of their,
Yes.
where you just had this stuff dripping down in different spots. And I'm like, what's happening here? Like I couldn't figure out. So I did kind of look at their projects and I recorded a new video of the things that I saw, and then, showed them the correct process for that. So one was pulling it all the way through.
Yeah.
The other was looking at the size of their stitching. I noticed when they got to this, their stitches got super big.
When they got to sewing around the circle.
Sewing around.
Yes.
And they could use the running stitch or the whip stitch. And a lot of them did the running stitch. And they were like this big. And that was another thing where we talked about, if it's too big, the stuffing is going to come out. So that was one thing. If I did it again, I'd probably reiterate that, the size of the stitching that it should be. And as a rule of thumb, I said it shouldn't be bigger than your fingernail.
Yeah.
That was an easy measurement, which is a little bit big, but not as big as two fingernails, which was you would get the stuffing falling out.
So what did you do to help the kids who had made their stitching too big?
I showed them some of the students whose work had smaller stitches. And, sometimes I would anonymously show work on our TV that, we have the document camera, and I'd show one and say, what do you notice about this one? And then, okay, what do you notice about this one? And I show it with the stuffing coming out. I probably should have looked at that much sooner. In retrospect, I'd look at it much sooner and catch it like the first day. But once they got to doing the outside, they were ready, to hit that home run, finish up.
Yeah, they were too excited. The bigger the stitches, the quicker they get to the end.
Yes. And they had been working on it, I think, about 2 weeks. So, and we'd work on it a little bit every other day. And so they were very anxious to I want to take my stuffy home because this is so cool.
So did you get them to go back over the stitch, or do another row of stitching over the top stitching?
A couple kids, I had them do it again. So it kind of closed those gaps. And then as we are getting to the end of it, because a lot of people finish much sooner. So sometimes you just gotta, and I think that's when I kind of looked at your book again and you said, no stitch is a bad stitch. Okay, maybe I just live and learn.
I actually, in my classes, when the stitches are too big, I just get them to go over the start, from again, or start from the beginning, or wherever the stitches are too big, just with a different colored thread. So they're different color, and they just go over the stitches. And that way you can still see that it's a different, you can see, it's easy for the kids to see their stitching if it's a different color, and then they just go over it, and they're quite happy just doing that, because they realize they need to have smaller stitches to make sure
that's a great idea.
So that's one of the things that I did that helps the kids. How do they go with threading the needles?
So I used a trick that I learned in my fiber arts class, which is using a Post-it note, smaller,
yes,
and doing that. And still there was some difficulty with that. Just, like sometimes they'd still have the Post-it note in there when they're threading. And I'd say the other difficulty they had was they started doubling up their thread, and then they'd run into issues when they had their thread doubled up, because they get there'd be tension and they get stuck. And it would start getting knotted. So there was just like some kind of strange things that were happening with the thread.
There's always strange things happening. Did you ever get the kids sewing so close to the end of the needle that there was no thread, or no such a little bit of thread left that they couldn't actually tie the knot in their stitch? And
then they would leave it to me to tie the thread, and I'm like, my fingers are just too big for that. So I would pull it out a little bit. And sometimes I'd have them add another piece of thread so we get a little more length to it.
Yes.
But yes, that was another thing that I forgot to mention.
I know sewing classes are always, no matter what you do, they're always hectic. I was going to ask, and tying the knots, you just practice tying the knots with the kids in their previous lessons?
Yes. So one was just kind of having them tie it around their finger, and showing them, re-recording the videos and showing them that. So I would say it's still a work in progress. I mean, I would definitely want to explore doing some macrame so we could get some more knotting knowledge under our belts.
So you had made a whole lot of videos for the kids that they could watch too. Oh, that's really amazing. That was really good. Anything that surprised you about the lesson that you weren't expecting, or all the things we've just talked about?
I would say the things that surprised me of just not pulling the thread all the way through, because I just kind of took it for granted that, oh, that's what you do. But maybe I didn't explain it to them, and this is their first experience with sewing. So they didn't know. And they, you can't assume they know how to tie a knot, or, the mechanics of it. So you really have to explain the mechanics of how the thread is moving through there, and, when to stop it.
What was the kids' reaction to sewing?
So once we started the project, every day they would ask, "Are we sewing today?"
I love that.
I said yes. They go, "Oh, yay."
Oh, that's really good.
They were bugging me every day for 2 weeks. And then last week, somebody says, "So when are we going to do some more sewing?" And I said,
that's so good.
So they definitely liked it and looked forward to it.
Any of the kids sewing at home that you know of?
I haven't asked. I should follow up with that. And I would say, one thing that I learned is when we did weaving, some kids found that very frustrating. They got kind of backwards, but with the sewing, I didn't see as much frustration with it. And there was more pleasure associated with the sewing. And I think it's because they were kind of being creative and making their own thing.
Yeah.
And it was something that they found useful as well, sewing a softie or a plushie.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I found that the kids loved about sewing, because at the end of the lesson, they would actually have something that they could hold and show. It was like, they've made a little friend, and that was something that was just with them all the time. Which is the kids just, and I guess it was what the kids would say, they've made something real. That was really important for the kids. And I think also sewing is it's not competitive. Whatever the kids make, it's always good.
it's always, perfect. It's always, they've done something like right, and there's nobody's better, nobody's worse. They're all good. So it's something I found that kids just love the sewing, and they've designed the project by themselves. It's all their work. I remember as a kid, sometimes I'd be in a class and I'd do a painting or do something, and then the teacher would come and help me fix my painting up, and all of a sudden my painting looked amazing, but it wasn't my painting. So I think one of the really lovely things about sewing is that the kids are doing it all by themselves, and they're making the decisions, which makes it really, really good. Any tips for teachers wanting to sew with their kids?
I highly recommend either finding some videos on YouTube that show the process up close, or if you're daring enough, making your own. If you have the equipment, that is definitely helpful for kids to see. And it's very difficult to teach in a classroom where you're at the front of the classroom and you've got kids at the back of the classroom. They just can't see. Even if you, I would say if you don't have access to that equipment, just form a circle. I think the first day I had the kids kind of form a circle around me and kind of really come in closer so they could see what I was doing.
Yeah, that sounds great. Any positive words of encouragement for teachers who aren't quite sure whether they want to sew with their kids or take on that massive task?
I would say make sure you scaffold the learning. So start with something simple like a little bit of weaving, maybe some paper weaving, or replicating that with the, using the lacing card with paper, starting with paper, whatever it is, so they can see the mechanics of it before they start using materials they're not familiar with. But it's very, if you just start going into it, and I've done this, I'm a newish teacher, so I've gone into projects and thought, I assumed they had skills, and I went into a big project and everybody struggled. So you just take it slow. We're not in a rush. Let's, teach them the basics. And then once they get going, they'll go faster, but you have to go slow to go fast.
Yeah, exactly. So will you be sewing again with your classes?
Yes, definitely. And if I teach upper grades, which I may change to an older grade, I think that they could have more challenging projects where they could do more design in the project. I've also thought about having a buddy class where, and I can't remember if this was on your website or somebody else's, having students, the younger students design a plushie and then have the older students sew it.
Yeah, that's amazing.
That would be a great STEAM art integrated lesson as well.
That's an amazing idea. A lot of teachers all around the world are doing that. Either they get the kindy kids to draw the softie that they want, and the older kids turn it into softie. And also had one teacher who actually got her older students to interview the younger students and ask them what they'd like in their project, and they had to sort of interview their kindy clients. And then from the interview, after the interview, that they would then design the softie or the stuffie from the interview questions. So it's a really, really lovely idea. And the kindy kids are so thrilled at the end of it, and the older kids are so excited because they've actually made something, for the little kids. So it's a really great idea.
I'd also say the benefit of sewing is the meditative aspect of it and the focus of it. So I think it's a very calming activity where people are very focused on one thing and doing that one thing. And so I think it's a good skill for students to practice.
It's nice. It's also something they're it's a life skill. They've always got the sewing, and they can always, sew on buttons or do anything. They've got it with them always. And I know in my classes, kids, teachers will often say, or parents will say the kids can't concentrate. But in my workshops, I have kids from 10 in the morning till 3 in the afternoon sewing. And I've got kids, starting from 5 years up. And they're there all day sewing. And even at lunchtime, they'll, after 5 or 10 minutes, eating their lunch, they'll decide they want to come back in and start sewing, because they're doing something that they just really love, and they can focus if they want to focus, if it's something they want to do.
It's something that involves, and I find this is true of other fiber arts like crochet or knitting or weaving, or I made this friendship
friendship
necklace. And they require your mind to be working, but you get to a point where it's automatic and you can talk and socialize. So the other benefit of this is a socialization of aspect of it, where, you know, kids have a sewing circle that they form,
Yeah.
you know, a table with their friends, and they're sewing and making and they're talking. And it's just a great feeling that goes out throughout the room when they're all doing that together.
Yeah, it's like the sewing circles of, you know, yesteryear when the women would
Yes.
get together and make, you know, sew quilts for someone in the community. And it was just a chance for them to get together, to chat and to, I guess, you know, tell their problems to each other in a very sort of, you know, easy sort of situation. So, yeah, but yeah, the kids sewing and chatting is always just like, it's a really lovely feeling. So I totally agree with you there. Is there anything you'd like to add or forgotten to ask? There's usually something I forget to ask.
I think that's it. I think that covers all
That's
of our questions.
okay. Thank you, Amy, for chatting today. And I'm looking forward to seeing what you sew next with your kids and
Hey.
students.
And if you're looking for some fun sewing projects for your students, then take a look at my favorite book, The Zenki Way. The Zenkis are the simplest to sew softies in the universe, and you can't get better than that. Your students are going to love them. And if you're looking for some fun videos to show your students on things like tying a knot, threading a needle, doing a running stitch, or anything like that, then please have a look at my YouTube channel. And if there's something you're looking for and it's not there, please ask me and I'll make a video about it. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments below, and happy sewing.